Who is Socrates and why is he so famous? If you ever ask anybody if they've ever heard of any ancient Greek philosophers, there are probably three names that come up: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Interesting thing, Plato's being Socrates' student, Aristotle's being Plato's student at one point in their lives. And actually, Socrates was a tremendous influence on Plato. But the interesting thing about Socrates was he really wrote absolutely nothing. He's known because of Plato's writing. Plato writes philosophy as dialogue, sort of as a play with different characters advancing different philosophical positions. And in these dialogues, as they're called, one of them being the Crito that we're going to be talking about, Socrates is the main character. And in fact, there are three dialogues just devoted to what made Socrates so famous, even though he wrote absolutely nothing. Socrates is known for being what some people have termed, I like to call it, the patron saint of philosophy. Now, most of you didn't know that philosophy had saints in it. In fact, most philosophers don't know that they have saints in it. But I think it's a good analogy to think of a religious figure. In fact, if you think of the central religious figure in Christianity, who is that? That's right, it's Jesus. Why is he the central character? Or you might say, even though it's probably a mixed metaphor, he's not exactly the patron saint because he's regarded as a more important character than just a saint, but he certainly is a saintly character in the Christian Messiah. But he's well known for dying for the sins of humanity, to wipe out, to atone for the sins of humanity, for original sin, etc. Well, similarly, Socrates was put to death. But Socrates was put to death for doing philosophy. And here's the little that you need to know about him. Back in ancient Greece, remember, Socrates' death was just a little bit before 400 B, or a little bit after 400 BCE. 399 BCE was the date that Socrates was put to death. Now, back in those days, the rich and famous didn't go flying around in jets. There weren't any jets. They didn't drive around their Ferraris. They didn't go to nightclubs at night. They didn't go to very fancy restaurants and stay in fancy hotels. Now, what did they do for entertainment? Well, there was this very wise man, Socrates, who used to go around the city asking various prominent citizens, people who would be equivalent to the mayor of the city, the social elite, the intellectual elite, the generals, the police chief, and he'd ask them questions like, what is justice? Questions about morality, questions that really we would recognize as philosophical questions. And in this regard, Socrates departed from the people who got philosophy started a few hundred years earlier. But he would go around and ask them questions about, for instance, what is justice? He'd ask the head of the state, and he'd get answers, and then he would proceed with what's called Socratic questioning. You might have heard the idea of Socratic questioning as a teaching technique. That is, people ask students, or professors ask students questions to lead them through and teach them certain things. Well, Socrates would ask these questions, and what he would do is draw out the consequences of the things that were said by the people who he's having these dialogues with, and he would get them to contradict themselves. Well, you can imagine doing this to the leaders of society did not make him their number one fan. You know, there's a training course for salespeople. It's the Dale Carnegie course, or courses, and they're kind of titled How to Win Friends and Influence People. That was not what Socrates was doing. He was out to do philosophy and find the truth. And as a result of that, he alienated a whole lot of people. Without going into a lot of details, he is put on trial on 2 charges. The first one, corrupting youth, which is a pretty easy charge to kind of nail to Socrates. That is, he had all these young, wealthy people hanging around with him, watching him have these dialogues. In fact, sometimes emulating these dialogues, making fun of other people. So he didn't win any friends in this regard. And the second charge was blasphemy. That is, denying the gods of Athens. Now, what's so bad about that? Well, murdering somebody, you were not charged with murder, but rather denying, going against the gods of Athens. And that is an offense for which the penalty, it can be death. It's a capital offense, as we would say today. Well, Socrates is put on trial, trumped up charges. He's framed. He actually doesn't do bad in the trial. He loses, but not by that much. And ultimately, he is sentenced to death. And that is what Socrates is famous for. And that's kind of the background where we needed to go to understand the situation that Socrates is in and kind of the moral problem that's being posed here. But let me pose it in a different way. Forget about Socrates. Let's say you have been framed for murder. The police put your prints on the murder weapon. They get witnesses to testify that you committed the murder, and they frame you for someone's murder. You go on trial. You present your best defense, and you're convicted and sentenced to death. By the way, I forgot to tell you, in the state of New York, where we are, where I am, at least the capital punishment, which is now outlawed, has been restored. So they're going to put you to death. So you're in the Brooklyn House of Detention, waiting to have your sentence carried out, and a friend of yours, who is very, very wealthy and very politically connected and can orchestrate all kinds of things that nobody else could have done, comes to you and says, look, they've given you a bad, they've got a raw deal here. They've put you in a bad situation. But here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm your friend. Why don't you just listen to me? I'll be able to pay off the guards. We'll fly you to an island in the Caribbean, beautiful island. You'll have a great life there. Your family can go with you. You'll have a great time. So here's your choice. Either you're going to be executed for something you didn't do, or you can listen to your friend, follow him out of that jail, and be free as a bird, living a terrific life. Now, I'm not going to ask you the moral question, what's the right thing to do? But here's the other question that we sometimes talk about is, what would you do? You've been framed. You're about to be executed for this crime. Are you going to stay, or are you going to leave? Why don't you sit down and tell me what you're going to do? Are you going to claim that that's the right thing to do? And if so, why? Now, I'm going to want you to write that down and make an entry in a discussion.